This is our last session in this quarter. So you want to know anything about theology, you'll have to find it out today, because this is it. I didn't realize the quarter was going by so fast. But it'll go by faster if we don't get started. So, top of the page, number 8. B. We're still talking about God as the judge, and God is shown as the supreme authority on the throne of heaven. Isaiah chapter 6, let's take a look there. This is what I believe is a vision that Isaiah has. And he was transported to the throne room of God. Who would like to read that? 1 through 7. Isaiah 6, 1 through 7. All right, Harold.
In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, all exalted. The train was filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 each over his face, 2 over his feet, 2 they stood. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The foundations of the threshold trembled as the voice again be called out, while the temple was filled with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips. I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King of the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, and with burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs, he touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this is the torch. This has touched your lips, and your iniquity has been taken away, and your sins are forgiven.
Thank you, Harold. Isaiah finds himself before God as he sits on a throne, the royal throne of heaven. All majesty is before him. As a result of a command from God, Isaiah's blank is taken away. His iniquity, his sin, it's all taken away. When Jesus spoke to the paralytic who'd been let down through a ceiling, he said, Son, your sins are forgiven you. And what did the Pharisees immediately say? Or ask, perhaps. But it was a rhetorical question. Well, that was an issue that they had, was healing on the Sabbath. But what they asked was, wait a minute, who can forgive sins but God alone? Yes, who had the authority to forgive sin? Were they right about that? They were absolutely right. What minor point were they overlooking at that? They didn't acknowledge Christ as God. then they would have, oh yeah, well sure, only God can forgive sin. But Jesus is the Son of God. He is divine. He has that authority. So this is what Isaiah sees in this vision, is God on the throne, exalted above all. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. He is supreme in authority. 1 Kings chapter 22. This is a fairly brief account of a prophet named Micaiah, for whom I have a great deal of respect, because he stood up for what was right in the face of very powerful opposition. Took the heat for it. Yes. Really, Micaiah. Well, that's a good name. And Micaiah, that's great. That's pretty neat. I didn't realize that. How many granddaughters do you all have? 10 granddaughters. So I don't feel too bad when they come in, and I'm not sure what your name is now. I know Morgan. Yep. Oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll learn her name then, and I can add her to Connor and Morgan. And which one was the Disney queen? Jennifer? Jessica? Jessica. Yeah, okay. 10 granddaughters. Whew. We have one, but we're working on it. Got another one coming. Oh, yeah. Yours are. And ours are, or our one is. Our one granddaughter. We've got a grandson, too. He's kind of great, too. You got me started off in the wrong direction. It's just... It's a good name. And it's a good name because it's connected with righteousness. That's what makes it a good name. That's what makes every name a good name. That's a good name. All right. 1 Kings 22, verses 19 to 23. Who would like to read that? Probably some of you already have. Anybody? All right, Robert. Yes, that'll do it.
On his right and on his left. The Lord said, who will entice Ahab to go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said this while another said that. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. The Lord said to him, how? And he said, I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. Then he said, you are to entice him and also prevail. Go and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets, and the Lord has proclaimed disaster against you.
All right. Thank you, Robert. The prophet Micaiah, saw God sitting on once again, sitting on a throne with all the blank of blank gathered around him, the host of heaven. From this throne, God blanked disaster against Ahab. I'm sorry? He proclaimed disaster against Ahab. Did Ahab fall to disaster? He did. So what we get from this is that God is pictured on the throne, and from his throne he pronounces judgments. He makes judgments about situations, circumstances, but especially about people. And those judgments stand. He not only has the authority, he exercises the authority as the supreme judge of all the world. And remember, what document did we talk about last week that initially recognized him as the supreme judge of the world? Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence. Our nation's declaration speaks of God as the supreme judge of all the world. Actually, it references God 4 times, our declaration. Now, don't get the Declaration confused with the Constitution, 2 separate documents, integrally connected, but they are separate documents. Number 14, Jesus Christ as judge. And then there's a quote, but he's given all judgment to the Son. That's from John 5:22. The reason I included that quote there is because just as soon as we start this section, we're going to see disclaimers where Jesus says, I did not come to judge. And it may seem like a contradiction, but when you see everything in context, it'll be clear that it's not a contradiction. Let's look first at John 3:17. John 3:17. And whoever gets to that and would like to read it, go ahead and read 3:16 with it to just put it in a very recognizable context.
God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world should be saved through him.
Very good. Thank you, Jake. For God... I messed that one up. Yeah. Did not, or really did not, surely did not, totally did not. I was trying to emphasize the did not part, and I forgot to get rid of that not. did not send the Son into the world to blank the world, judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. John 8:15. We'll look at all these and we'll come back and discuss them. Who's got John 8:15? Anybody? All right. You judge according to the flesh. I am blank judging anyone. I'm not judging anyone. How's that? All right, John 12:47. Who's got that?
If any man hear my voice and believe not, I judge you not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save it.
Thank you, Larry. If anyone hears my sayings and does not keep them, I blank blank judge him. Same thing. I do not judge him. The reason I keep making those blank is to reemphasize that he's saying, I didn't come to judge, I do not judge. And then he says, for I did not come to blank the world, judge the world, but to save the world. It might seem redundant, but I really wanted to make the point that there are several times where Jesus says, I didn't come for the purpose of judging the world. Why does he say he came? To save the world. Now, will Jesus eventually be judge? Other passages teach very clearly that he will eventually be judge. But that's not the main purpose for which he came. If I go fishing, I'm going for whatever reason, to relax, to catch some fish, to bring home something to eat, which I hope that's not the case because we're going to go hungry a lot of the time. But if while I'm fishing, I see a water moccasin, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to kill a water moccasin. I do not suffer those things to live. You can hug all the trees you want. Now, water snakes, I'm not too worried about water snakes, but a water moccasin is a different animal, and I will kill it every time I have the opportunity. Did I go fishing to kill a water moccasin? I did not. But I killed him. Take.
Back in John 15, I think it's important that how we underscore according to the flesh.
Yes.
Son of man, son of God. Same person, but great distinction between the fleshly part and his function as deity. And so, from the standpoint of judgments that we're going to be looking at, that's the Son of God. And he didn't hesitate by miracles and other demonstrations to identify himself in that regard. But what he's trying to help us see is that in the flesh, both he and we have limitations. He hadn't put on him. He got hungry. He got thirsty. He was human. And that little expression, according to the flesh, really explains then that God is not judging. And thus he's warning us later about our judging.
Absolutely.
When we judge with this, we can be like him. And we do have to make judgments.
Yes.
And that according to the flesh is an important participial expression.
It is very important because it tells us of the standard by which he is making judgments and passing judgments and executing the result of his judgments. He does not judge according to the flesh. There are several standards of judgment we could use. For example, one of those is what's happening in this country. The question is coming down, will parts of the United States allow Sharia law to be used to make judgments about moral behavior? That's a question. Why is that a question? Because Sharia law is, fill in the blank, from our law. It's different. It's a different standard, completely different standard, based on a completely different code. And so those two standards are in opposition to one another. They both can't stand. You can only judge by one. Harold?
It's an interesting thought to me. It says, the word that I have spoken will judge him in the last day. So when I look at the criteria for being judged, whether Jesus Christ does it or he does not do it, it will be based on what the word says. And so that's the criteria that I will stand in judgment for. Jesus Christ is just the Son of God, not just, but of course he is. But the word that he's spoken is what really judges us in the end.
Yes. Now you're getting ahead of us. You're not allowed to do that. You gotta. But that's a perfect point, and we want to make that point and stick to it. But it's interesting. What he says in verse 48 is, my word's going to be the standard of judgment. But he says prior to that, I want you to be clear, I didn't come to judge anybody. Why did Jesus come again? We'll reiterate. He came to save us. He did not come to judge. He came to save us. What if we refuse the salvation? Then we're stuck. And he is stuck. How is Jesus stuck if we refuse to repent? He has to judge us. He has no choice. Our children have put us in this position as parents. When we were children, we put our parents in that position. Our behavior limited them as to their righteous response. To overlook our behavior, our parents would have been wrong at times. To be right as parents, they had to take us in hand, and you don't look too guilty, Cheyenne, as I'm talking about parents and children, but they had to do something about our situation. That's only right. That's only right. Because if they didn't do it, it wouldn't have been right at all.
We more or less judge ourselves when we don't accept Jesus. It's like we're judging our own self.
There is a sense in which that is true, because just like there are standards of judgment, those same standards are what you and I choose for our behavior. We know the law. We know it's wrong to lie, but if we choose to lie, we have put ourselves in a situation where the judgment has already been set. We've made the choice, and by our choice, we establish our presence in righteousness or in unrighteousness. That's absolutely true. Seems like there was another point I wanted to make. Oh, just by way of illustration, talking about judging according to the flesh. I used to have really good eyes, and I did not need glasses at all. I enjoyed those days. They're gone. If I pull these off and I look at this page, depending on the adjustment of my distance, I can sort of read, but I can't read clearly. One of the places where I go to hunt, I have to access it by a combination lock. And if I get out of the car to open the gate and I forget my glasses, I got to go back to the car because I can't see it. If you can't see clearly, you can't make a clear judgment. If a judge is judging you, what does that judge have to know in order to make a good judgment? He's got to know the law. That's why before you become a judge, you first have to be a lawyer. And as long as everybody's honest, that works out fine. And Marty, don't get into that. But that goes back to another law, John. The Ten Commandments are part of God's law. It's an expression of God's law. When I keep coming back to this illustration of parenting and with children. Do we have to tell our children every detail about what's wrong and right, or after a while, do we have a reasonable expectation? And I ask this, I always ask it from the standpoint of the parents. I should go back and say, remember when you were a kid and you were thinking about one kind of behavior or another, and you're thinking, well, mom and dad, they never told me not to do this, but what did you know? Better not, because mommy and daddy will not be happy. Now, they may have never detailed it out that that's a behavior they don't want you to be involved in, but you know because of the nature of that behavior that it's not something mom and dad want you to do. And so in doing it, you knew you would be guilty. It's the same with regard to it's similar with regard to the Ten Commandments. And when you look at that law, you see which way the wind's blowing. How's God want us to deal with our parents? He wants us to honor our parents. How many gods are there? There's one. What about honesty? Don't ever tell a lie. You better not ever bear false witness. What about loyalty? Don't you lust after another man's wife. He better not lust after yours. You get your wife, you get your husband. They're yours. They're not anybody else's. So many values we see in the Ten Commandments that aren't necessarily spelled out in detail, but the commandments show us the values of God. And I'm glad you brought that up. That helps to bring the standard of God's judgments down into a pretty succinct code.
About something, they always give me the same answer, because I told you so.
Okay. So just like God was the supreme judge in your home, in your family, your parents were the supreme judges. That's the way it's supposed to be. And where do the supreme judges get their authority? From the supreme judge. Honor your father and your mother. Yes.
An article on the sports page this past week, and the initial part of it was, what was the greatest wrong in sports in the past year? And he mentioned like Nixon up here hitting that lady and all that's gone in the courts, and he mentioned 4 or 5 sex scandals and some abuse patterns, and he said that was not the greatest offense, really. And then he mentioned the decision in the OSU game, and I think the Central Michigan, right at the end, the referees didn't know the rule, and they gave another play to Central Michigan that resulted in a Hail Mary pass and a victory.
Right.
I think all of us remember that. Well, what he gave them later was not only had they failed, and then he began to idealize what would have happened to Central Michigan if they had said that was wrong, we do not deserve this victory, it belongs to OSU. And he went down the whole trail of accolades they would have received, and they would have been honored, and they would have better recruiting arrangements and all that. Well, then he mentioned a high school in Ohio that had almost an identical situation, and they made the same decision and gave a right to a team that ended up winning when they should have lost. And down at the end, his closing comment was, we don't know the background of all the people, but wouldn't it be bad if we don't know the difference in right and wrong?
Right.
And, of course, for OSU, it meant a big difference at the end then, especially if they're beating Oklahoma. They would have been 10-1, I think, or something like that. Anyhow, this just shows that law and human judgments really need to go together, because we know in Isaiah, some begin to call evil good and good evil. And what a tragedy it would be if we don't know the difference in right and wrong. That's what this whole class is about.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring this up, because I couldn't help think as you were describing what happened. Well, put it to you this way. Was it wrong what happened? I think we can all agree that it was wrong. It just wasn't the way it was supposed to be, because it wasn't according to the rules. They didn't know the rules were broken, wrong was done, and people have suffered because of that wrong. Now, let's take this to a higher level. What if someone was basing their whole life on the outcome of these games? What kind of judgment is that? What kind of reasoning? Now you've lowered your standard of life down to the outcome of something like this. And people do this all the time. Maybe not for a sports game, but they look at life, well, now, if this happens this way, then that means God doesn't love me, or my dog died, or whatever, so God hates me. And you lower your standard of judgment about situations to encompass much more than it was supposed to encompass. In this case, if somebody was a Christian and they lost this huge game and they didn't get to go to the nationals or the finals or whatever, and the trophy wasn't there, well, big deal. That's not the standard by which I gauge the quality of my life. I've got a higher standard. The standard for quality of life is about righteousness. And where do we get that from? We get it from God. We don't get it from any other book. We get it from God and His book. So this illustration brings us to a whole nother level of thinking and seeing this. Now, I have restored my glasses. My judgment about the words and numbers on this page is clear. So if I put them down right, I can read them right. There's that large parenthetical statement, and I realize I did not close the parentheses, I just opened it, but it's supposed to close with that quote from Matthew, or the reference from Matthew 25:41. To understand Jesus' statements that He did not come to judge the world, while other texts clearly teach that He will judge the world, we must understand at least three truths about the will of God. Dayton introduced these to us a couple of weeks ago as we were discussing God as judge. First, there is the blank will of God. Who knows what should go in that one? Anybody remember class a couple weeks ago? The ideal will of God. Right into that first blank, ideal. The ideal will of God, which is His original and foremost desired will. Did God want Adam and Eve to sin? He did not. His ideal will was that they would live in righteousness, but they did not. Ideally, back to the fourth line in this quote, God willed that Adam and Eve obey Him regarding the forbidden fruit. When they did not, we then see an example of God's, and in this blank, put allowed. His allowed will. It's not what He originally wanted, but He will allow this. So where are we going to go to lunch? Somebody says, I want to go to Earl's. Okay, we're going to Earl's. You get to Earl's and it's closed. I know, I've made you sad. What are you going to do? Are you not going to eat? Oh, blasphemy. Going to eat. Where are you going to go? Somewhere else. Ideally, you wanted to go to Earl's, couldn't go to Earl's, now you will allow yourself to go somewhere else. That's really bringing this down on a fleshly, earthly level, but it's the same thing essentially. When they did not, we see then an example of God's allowed will when He provides clothing for them and mercy with regard to their sin, since they were no longer able to comply with His ideal will. The ideal will is gone. It's not reachable. God's ideal will is absolute moral perfection in our behavior. We can't do that, so He has condescended to us in a very merciful way to give us His allowed will. What will He now allow us to do? And then we have God's ultimate will. So in the first blank, you have ideal. Second blank, you have allowed. In the third blank, God's ultimate will is what He must finally do in just or righteous response to human behavior. Jesus foretells of God's ultimate will when He reveals the blank blank that has been prepared for the blank and his angels. Eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. It's interesting that he says that in Matthew 25:41. It's prepared for, it's specifically prepared for the devil and his, he didn't just happen to have that place, but it was prepared for the devil and his angels. Who else is going to go there according to Matthew 25? All the goats, all those who do not obey the gospel, they will be sent to the place of eternal fire. Now, I have heard people say, and there's a sense in which I agree with it. We even touched on it a little while ago with Frank's comment, that God doesn't send anybody to hell. Well, that's not quite true. He's going to send everybody to hell who's going to hell. We make the choice, yes, what standard of behavior we will keep in our lives. And in that way, we, in a sense, judge ourselves. But in the final judgment, it will be God who says, you are condemned outside of my Son. You are now going to the place of eternal fire with the devil and his angels. That is his judgment, and he will send us there. Nobody's going to say, well, judgment's over, I guess I'll go to hell now, and then walk off voluntarily. Doesn't work that way. How do you even get there? How do you get to heaven? One way. One way. It's Jesus. And none of us are going to get there. We wouldn't even know where to look to start searching for it without Jesus. But he is the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody comes to the Father except by him. It is also just as true that nobody will go to hell except by Jesus, because he will be the final judge. That will be his ultimate will regarding judgment. All right, B, bottom part of the page. Clear statements posing Jesus as the final judge. And my goodness, these are not all of them. There's a bunch. John 5:19-30. Let's see how much time we've got left here. All right. Let's go to that text. I don't think we'll take the time to read it. I hate not to do that, but for time's sake, I'll give you 10 seconds to scan it. 1, 2. All right, I'm just kidding with you. Let's see if we can fill in the blanks. Jesus says that not even the Father blanks anyone. Everybody agree with that? Where do you see that in the text? 22. There it is. You see it? Not even the Father judges anyone. He's given all judgment to the Son. Oops. He's given all judgment to the Son. Once again, this text shows God as the blank authority. What would you put in that blank? Supreme authority. Why is that? Because only one in a superior position can give authority to another. This text specifically states that God the Father has given to the Son authority to execute judgment. God has given to the Son the authority to execute judgment, and that Jesus will judge as he. This one's a little farther down in the text. Look at verse 30. I can do nothing on my own initiative, Jesus says. As I hear, what does he do? He judges. So God says, I'm giving judgment to my Son. Jesus says, I am judging according to the word and will of the Father. So they're working in conjunction just like they always have. But the authority is given from the Father to the Son to execute judgment. And the Son says, I am executing judgment, and I'm doing it according to the will and word of the Father. John 12:44-50. Now, Harold, we've caught up with you. Back to John 12. Somebody read those few verses, please. We'll go ahead and take the time to read them. Who's got it?
Jesus cried out and said, you believe in me, and not believe in me, but in him who sent me. Who beholds me, the
Excellent. Thank you, Jake. To believe in Jesus is to believe in God. If Jesus is rejected, he will not judge them, but they will be judged by his word. His word. Will be judged by his word. You see, what Jesus is continually stating here is that I'm getting what I'm giving you from my Father. He's given me the authority to judge, and I'm judging you by the word. I'm not going to judge anybody, but what will be the judge? The word. So when Jesus, and we've got to understand what he's saying, he will be the person who is judging, but he's judging by the standard. It's just like when you've got a judge sitting on the bench. What's his standard of judgment? The law. It's got to be the law. Does he have any authority to go outside the law? He has no authority to go outside the law. That judge is bound by the law to judge according to law, and Jesus is exactly the same. So when he says, I'm not judging you, but when your behavior comes before me, I'm going to compare your behavior with the word that I've spoken, and if it doesn't match you up, I'm sorry, you're lost. That is why our salvation is by faith. Faith through his grace. He gives us grace. He says, I know you're not righteous, but like he said to Abram, and he recounted this again for us in Romans chapter 4. What was it about Abram that was counted as righteousness? His faith. That's what the judge says. The judge says this is according to law, this is according to righteousness, because according to 1 John chapter 2, who's our advocate? Jesus Christ. Who made him our advocate? God the Father. Who paid the price for our sin? Jesus. Who arranged for him to pay the price for our sin? It's a pretty good deal, isn't it? He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to put your faith in me. I want you to confess my name. Let somebody bury you in water, to be buried and resurrected from that grave. Just like I was killed and buried and resurrected. You're going to die to sin. You're going to be buried in water and resurrected to walk in what kind of life? Newness of life. It's such a fantastic plan. And that not only gives us freedom, it gives God freedom. He is now free to relent from the condemnation he would have had to bring on us that righteousness demands. But he paid for our sin, and he can now let us go free and bring us to himself. Dayton?
Good parallel to John 5 and 1 John 15, verses 27 and 28, where Paul wrote, for he, God, put all things in subjection under his or Christ's feet.
Yes.
But when he said all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is accepted who did subject all things unto him. And when all things have been subjected unto him, then shall the Son also himself be subjected to God, that did subject all things unto him, that God may be all in all.
Yes.
Parallel passage.
Exactly. It's 1 Corinthians 15. He was reading from 1 Corinthians 15, if you want to go back and catch that. Another text before the last bell rings that I would like you to note for future study is Acts chapter 10 and verse 42. Peter is preaching to Cornelius, and he says that God has set Jesus up to be the judge. Another one is Acts 17, where Paul is preaching on Mars Hill, and he says that God has appointed a day in which he will judge the world by one man, and has testified to this, having raised him from the dead. I don't think there's much doubt as to who he's talking about in Acts chapter 17. So any observations or questions, anything you'd like to say before we conclude this morning's session? Too late. Thank you for being here in this class.